Hi everyone, this is Gareso here and welcome to tutorial number 4. Sorry about the clickbaity title, I couldn't resist, but the techniques I'm sharing here really changed the way I work once I've learned them. Some are simpler and some could probably use their own tutorial, but I'll try my best to show you how they can optimize the way you work as well. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. The number one requirement for sponsors in this channel is that they have to offer a product or service that I can endorse myself. And that was too easy this time. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives that I've been a happy member for a while now. I just think Skillshare is pretty much a must-have. First, because it's very affordable. If you sign up for a year, it's less than $10 a month. Second, because there is an amazing number of great classes from top creatives to choose from. And there are always new classes being added. You can learn storyboard for animation with Sarah Beth Morgan, or take one of Jake Bartlett's classes like The Beginner's Guide to After Effects, or you can get into graphic design with one of the fun Aaron Draplin's classes, or even learn how to illustrate in Procreate with Jerome Vogel. Well, you get the idea. The first 500 people that join using the link on the description of this video will get 2 months of free unlimited access to all Skillshare classes. Watch as many classes as you want. You can cancel anytime, but if you're like me, you'll probably stick around after that time. I think it's just too much value for the price. Before we start, don't forget you can download the project file for this tutorial and all the other tutorials and workflow videos on my website. Alright, so first tip on the list, moving the anchor point position during animation. It sounds very basic, but it's also a lifesaver in some situations. Normally, when you want to change the anchor point of an object during animation, you would probably create a new node object, and then position where you want it to be, and then parent the object to the node object. So when you want to rotate the object, it just rotates on its anchor point. But if you want to rotate from this point here, you just rotate the node object and they are separate from each other. And that works perfectly if you want to have only 2 anchor points. But what if you want to rotate this cube on the floor here? The problem in this situation is that you need more than 2 anchor point positions. Because as the cube rolls on the floor, the anchor point will need to change between all the 4 tips here. So when you rotate here, the anchor point would be here. So if you keep rotating, the anchor point we need to move here, and so on. In this kind of situation where you need to have the anchor point move into more than 2 positions, this tip comes in really handy. And it saves you the work of having to create complex rigs and this kind of stuff. So at first you could try just animating the anchor point and the rotation. So let's get the pen behind tool here, where the shortcut is Y, and then you move the anchor point holding Control to snap to the tip here. Alright, so let's set keyframes, rotate 90 degrees, then set keyframe again, move the anchor point to the other tip, move the timeline, rotate again, and set keyframe for the anchor point. And let's just set hold keyframes because we don't want to have the anchor point animating, but it just doesn't work. The problem here is that the position is not changing at the same time. So when you get to this point and change the anchor point to the next tip, the square will snap to the last position. Alright, so we need to animate the position as well, but it's not as straightforward as it seems. Let's just delete all the keyframes here and start all over. Let's just move it back to the position here. And let's set keyframes to all the properties again. And let's try it again. So move the timeline, rotate 90 degrees, set keyframes, move the anchor point again. But this time the position is being animated as well. So that's more promising, right? All we need to do is just to toggle hold keyframes. So it's working. Let's go to the next row, 90 degrees plus 90, then set keyframes again, move the anchor point holding Control or Command, and that's pretty much it. But there are some catches in this technique. For example, let's move the timeline here, rotate another 90 degrees. And if we don't set keyframes and try to move the anchor point, it's just, that's what happens. It doesn't work. So we need to create keyframes before we do this. And we also need to have the keyframe selected. Because if I don't have the keyframe selected, the same thing happens again. So create keyframes, have the keyframe selected, and then you can move the anchor point and snap holding Control or Command key to the next tip. And so on. Plus 90 degrees, new keyframes, move the anchor point holding Control, and that's it. Now the anchor point is moving to all the four corners of the square, but it's staying in the same position because it's changing both the anchor point and the position at the same time. If you want to change the rotation, let's say in this point here, I don't want the square to be flat on the floor. I want it to climb a slope here. If I try changing the rotation here, the square will rotate based on the new anchor point here. But I want it to rotate based on this anchor point here. So let's just move these two keyframes momentarily. And now before we move it back, we select all the position keyframes with the selection tool here, which is V, the shortcut. So V, and move these keyframes to where the next anchor point will be. We can just zoom in here to be more precise. And that's it. That's good enough. Then we move back the keyframes. And now we have the square just climbing this slope while keeping the rest of the animation intact. And then we can just finalize by creating an overshoot here. Let's change the anchor point, move a couple of frames, do like a little bit of just overshoot animation. Let's put an ease here. And that's it. The rolling square is a nice example of this technique, but it could also be any other geometric shape or anything really that you want to change the anchor point position during the animation, without the need to use no objects or complex rigs of any kind. Number 2 on the list is Effects Compositing Options. This feature allows you to use masks to control the areas affected by any effect. This basically saves you the hassle of creating lots of adjustment layers or pre-comps to achieve the same result. So we have this nice photo here in our comp, and by the way, I got this photo at unsplash.com. If you're not familiar with this site, you should definitely check it out. It's a completely free stock photo website with some amazingly good quality photos. Anyway, back to track here. So let's apply an effect here. Let's say a hue saturation. And let's increase the saturation here so we can see the effect in action. Now let's just draw a mask like we would normally do. And the mask is masking as expected. And then if we want to use that mask for the effect here, we can just double click on the effect to reveal it on the timeline. And down here you can see we have this compositing options property. So if we just click on the plus sign here, it will automatically use the mask that we just created as a mask for the effect here. And now we can see we have this blue circle icon here and this effects icon over here as well, which is telling us that this mask is being used by the effect and not to mask the photo. You can add more masks to the same effect. All you have to do now is to come down here and press the plus sign again. So it's using mask 1 and mask 2. And you can also apply other effects. Let's apply a curves effect. And let's just make it really obvious so we can see it working. And then let's draw another mask down here. Then let's double click on the effect here to review the options on the timeline. Let's press the plus sign, but this time we don't want mask 1, we want mask 3. And that's it. There's a curves affecting this area here, and hue saturation using these two masks over here. And that works with any type of layer. Alright, number 3 on the list is CC Composite. If you follow my tutorials and have downloaded some of my project files, you have probably seen me using this effect. CC Composite is the key that allows you to create complex effects using only one layer. So on top of reducing the amount of layers in your timeline, you can create presets to optimize your workflow. So let's create a random shape here just so I can illustrate what I'm talking about. And let's apply some effects, maybe a turbulent displace, something really obvious so we can see the effect working. So maybe also a fill to change the color. And then if I want to bring my original layer back in, all I have to do is to apply CC Composite. And then let's uncheck RGB only so we bring back the alpha channel as well. And then I can put the original layer behind what we have here. And we can also change the blending modes the way we would do normally in the layer down here. That's the basic idea, but let's get something more practical now. So in this comp we have these two photos in two different pre-comps down here. And let's say we want to apply a basic bloom or hazy effect on these photos. On the right here, I'll do the way I would normally do, which is duplicating the layer. Let's call it effect layer. And then let's apply a fast box blur. Let's increase the radius. Let's just check repeat edge pixels. And then let's just apply curves effect and increase the contrast a little bit. And then let's change the blending mode to overlay, for example. And that's the result over here. But if you want to make that look into a preset, you need to be using just one layer. So let's just copy those effects over here and paste to the left side here. And then we apply CC Composite. And let's choose overlay as the blending mode. So it's almost there, but it's not quite right. What's happening here is that CC Composite is compositing the original layer on top of the effects. So if I change the order here, and let's change that to overlay as well, you see now that's the same thing. So let's put back the original layer behind. Let's say that's the look we want. So how we can achieve that with just one layer if CC Composite is compositing our layer on top? There is another effect called compound arithmetic. Let's just disable CC Composite for a moment. And this effect works in a similar way as CC Composite. Here you can choose which layer you want to composite behind the effects, but in this case we want the same layer. And then on the operator, you can choose overlay. And that's exactly the same look. So if you're not using one of those behind or in front options here, which are not blending modes, CC Composite will composite the original layer on top of the effects you've just applied here. So if we just disable this one and enable CC Composite here, we change the order of the layers, we get the same result. So CC Composite, original being blended on top of the effects, and then compound arithmetic the other way around, the effects being composite on top of the original. But there is another example I want to show you before we jump to the next tip. Let's just draw a square here. I'm sure you are familiar with the page turn effect. Call me techie, but I really like this effect. I think it's very versatile and it can be used in so many situations, and I think it's just underrated. Anyway, let's just change the back page to none here so it's more obvious. And one of the problems with this effect is that it doesn't cast shadows when you fold the page. You could easily duplicate the layer and have the top one to render just the back page and the bottom one just the front page, and then just use some drop shadow or radial blur or anything to add a shadow here. But as an exercise, let's try to create everything using just one layer and CC Composite. So let's try to create the shadow first and then apply the CC page turn again on the original. So we need the back page to start with, as that's the part that's going to be casting the shadow. And this time let's use a CC radial fast blur as the shadow. And let's apply a fill so we can change the shadow color. Let's make it black for the moment so it's easier to see. And now if we apply the CC composite effect, unchecking RGB only and placing it behind, we have the shadow applied on top of our original layer here. So now if we apply the CC page turn again, let's just close the effects up here so it's easier to see, because now I want to link those properties to the properties on the first page turn up here. So if we alt click fold position, it opens up the expression field, and let's just pick whip the fold position of the first page turn, press enter, and also of course change the controls to top right corner as it's up here. Let's also change the back page to none, opacity to 100%. Now let's just tweak the blur a little bit. Let's increase the amount. Let's change the position. We can also apply another blur after the radial fast blur so we can get rid of those sharp tips. And then we have a simple page turn now with shadow using only one layer. And we can also apply another CC composite and drag it just after the first CC composite using stencil alpha if we want to get rid of the shadow that goes outside of the shape here. In the end, I thought this was so interesting that I ended up creating a proper preset for that I'll make available on the project files of this tutorial. Let me just show this preset pretty quickly, which is page turn shadow. And here you have all sorts of links and other effects, and it's basically a rig for lights. You can change the direction of the light, you can control the fold as you normally would, but I thought it was a good idea to show you the power of combining effects and using CC Composite to have everything in one layer so you can create presets and optimize your workflow. That's the same way of thinking that I use to create the flexible noise texture preset. Alright, on to tip number 4, which is essential graphics. This one flew under my radar for a long time, but it blew my mind once I was introduced to it. You can access this feature through the window menu and then just select Essential Graphics, and you get this new panel over here. So basically this panel holds selected properties from the layers down here to be used outside of this comp. The first thing we need to do is to select the composition here, which in this case is example. So we can start selecting properties to add here. Let's say the source text, but you'll see there are some properties that cannot be dragged into this window here, saying it's not yet supported. That's why we have this solo supported properties button up here. If we click it, it's gonna solo all the supported properties for all the layers in your timeline. Now you know what's supported and what's not supported. If you can find something that you want to use with Essential Graphics down here, there are some workarounds you can do by linking the property one to a slider or other expression controls, but I'm not gonna get into this here. Anyway, so let's just add more properties here, maybe position and opacity. Let's just call it text position and text opacity, so we know that's for the text layer. And for the shape layers down here, we have options for all the different shapes inside the shape layer. So in this case, the triangle, the ellipse, and the rectangle. So for now, let's just get maybe the triangle, not the stroke, but the fill color. So let's call it top triangle color. And then let's just go to the second shape layer here and do the same thing for the triangle, not the stroke, the fill, and then call it bottom triangle color. Okay, let's just close all the layers down here so it's easier to see all the layers. And now anything I change up here will change the selected properties without having to find these properties on the layers down here. So if I change the color, we'll change the color here. So you can pretty much use Essential Graphics as a shortcut for the selected properties, which can be accessed anywhere in After Effects. So let's say we drag this comp into another pre-comp. Let's call it pre-comp 1. And if we change the text here, let's say we want example again, it's still changing our original layer, and it doesn't matter how many levels you always have access to this, and it's always changing the original comp, which is this one here. But it gets even more interesting. Let's go to the pre-comp 1 here, and here's our master comp. If we twirl down the layer here, you can see there's a master properties group here. And inside this group, you have all the same properties as you have up here on the Essential Graphics panel. But there is a difference. Anything you change in the Essential Graphics panel will essentially make changes to our original comp here. And anything you change on the master properties on the timeline panel will make changes to this copy of the comp only. So if we have two copies, and let's show all the properties here. And let's just move them side by side here so we can see them better. So that's the other one, 50%, 50%. And let's just make sure we can see them at the same time. And let's go back to the master properties here like we had before. So any changes you make to the properties on the timeline panel will affect only this copy of the pre-comp. So let's change the color here to blue, and then this other one to green, and let's change the source text by right-clicking and edit value, and let's call it test. And as you can see now, you have two copies of the same comp, but they are behaving like two separate comps for these properties here. And that's extremely powerful in some situations. But as soon as you make changes to one of the properties here, they're now independent. So if I change the text on the main comp, let's say master, only the comp with the default source text property will change. The other one will just stay with the new value. It's easy to see which properties have changed because these two little icons here just activate next to the properties we've changed, and also for the group up here as well. This one here is the pull from master comp, and this one here is push to master comp. These little arrows here kind of indicate what's happening. Pull from master comp will basically reset the value to match the value that's on the Essential Graphics panel, which is the master values. So we can reset the color of this triangle here as well to match the yellow we have on the master comp. And push does the opposite. It pushes the new value into our master properties up here. So now green is the default color. So just imagine how you can optimize your workflow using this feature. But it doesn't stop there. Let me show you something else. Let's go back to the master comp here, and let's create some keyframes. Let's say we want to have some position keyframes. And then let's move this way, and then that way. A really nice animation. Now, if we go back to the pre-comp here, you can see that the same keyframes are now visible outside of the main comp. So let's say you want to offset the animation. All you need to do is just to select the keyframes and offset it here. And there you go, you have an offset animation. Or even adjust the speed for this specific layer. But as it happens to all the other properties, any changes you make to the keyframes here will make this property unique to this copy of the comp here. If you change something by mistake, like I did here, all you have to do is to pull from master comp, and it's default again. And then you could animate the position for the comp as well. And it's easier to see the relation of the keyframes now that you can adjust them all in the same comp. Let's say you want to just sync these two keyframes here. And if you want to make this new animation your default animation, all you have to do is to push to the master comp, and all the comps with the default value will update as well. How cool is that? And here I'm just doing some silly animations, but you can go crazy with effects, complex animations, transitions, and pretty much anything you like. And to finish it up, you can also save all your setup here, all your animation, anything you did to the master comp as a motion graphics template to be used in Adobe Premiere. So let's create a name here. Let's say test template, and let's hit export motion graphics template. Okay, let's save it. Let's keep the destination as it is for the moment and just hit OK. So let's jump to Premiere, and here is the same thing. All you have to do is open the Essential Graphics panel, and let's just search for our template here, test, and here it is, and then just drag it to the timeline, and then you just have to select it, and here you have all the same options you had in After Effects. So if I change the text to test template, the text changes, and we can tweak the position, opacity, the color of the elements. But there is a catch here. As you can see, the animation didn't come through. What happens is that you cannot change any keyframes inside Premiere. So if you want to keep the animation for a given property, you cannot make it editable here as well. So you either keep the animation or have it editable over here. As I want to keep this animation, let's go back to After Effects and fix this. So all I have to do is to delete the property here and save the preset again. Save it. Yeah, replace. Then let's go back to Premiere. Let's delete this one. Browse again and bring it back again. And now we have the animation here. And you can still change the text. And all the other properties like we did before. This is a very powerful way of integrating After Effects and Premiere, and also to optimize your workflow inside After Effects. There is a whole market for Premiere templates out there, and people are making a lot of money selling them. Have a dig around the internet if you got interested in this. Okay, we are almost there. Let's go to the last tip, which is CC Glass. I was first introduced to this effect while watching one of the great video Copilot's tutorials. Out of all the useful techniques you can learn from Andrew Kramer's tutorials, I'm specifically adding this effect to this list because it opens up a whole world of possibilities. It's basically a 3D displacement or bump map inside After Effects. One of my favorite uses for this effect is to quickly add another dimension to flat textures. Let's say you want to use a texture, like maybe this wood texture here, as a background for something. Let's create a new comp. Let's call it wood texture. Let's leave it 1920 by 1080. Okay. Let's just drag it outside. And let's drag our texture to our new comp here and close this window. Alright, the texture is quite big. Let's just scale it down and rotate it 90 degrees. And let's scale until it fills the whole comp. Okay. Now let's pre-compose this texture. Selecting Move All Attributes into the new composition and hit OK. Now we have a pre-comp that's exactly the same size as the main comp, so the effect can be constrained to the comp size and not the layer size. Now we can try applying CC Glass to the layer as is, and you can see that it's already changing its appearance. And then we can come to Surface. Let's reduce the softness, let's say to 1, and then the displacement to 0. And then on the light group here, let's just use AE lights. And of course, let's create a new light. And let's make it a point light. Hit OK. Let's just increase the light intensity here. And let's just move it around so you can see that's already affecting our texture. And you can see that's already promising. We can reduce the height here just to make it less grainy. And we already have a kind of nice effect going on here, but I feel it's still too grainy. Let's just get closer. And you can see we still have lots of noise. So how can we have a better control over this? If you look at the CC glass effect, you see that the bump map is using the original layer and it's using the lightness of the texture. We could try changing the channel here to see if we get better results, but I still don't have the control I want. And changing the values here doesn't help too much either. So we need to create a new bump map to have a better control of how this looks. But before we do that, one thing I like to do is to create a solid. Let's move it below the light and copy the effect with property links, which is Command or Control Alt C. Or you can come up here and edit, copy with property links, and paste it to the new solid. Now you can see that this effect is linked to the effect on the original layer. You can see that the properties are red here, which means they are being affected by expressions. And now, if I change the values on the original layer, the effect here will update as well. I like to do this because now we have a better view of how the effect is affecting the layer compared to seeing it applied on the texture. So it's just a nice way to visualize and fine-tune the effect. So to create our new bump map, let's just duplicate the original texture down here. Let's just turn this layer off for the moment. And for the bump map, we don't need the CC glass effect, so let's delete it. And now let's pre-compose this layer again, and let's call it bump map. And we can move this layer below the original layer. Now, before we start editing the bump map, we need to change the bump map here to the new bump map on both layers, because unfortunately the layer selector here is not keyframeable, which means we cannot link them via expressions. But anyway, now that we are all set up, let's create a new comp viewer. And before we start tweaking our bump map, let's just enable the solid again. And now let's get inside our pre-comp here. Okay, as CC glass is using only the lightness of the bump map, let's just apply a hue saturation here and desaturate the texture. And let's apply a curves effect to start editing our bump map. So the curves graph here goes from black to white. And if we just drag the curve to the middle here, we get a neutral color. We get a 50% gray, which is neutral, which means no pixels are being pushed up or down in the effect. Now let's add some points to the curve here. We can add even more points if you want to have more control. And now we can start playing around with these points here to bring the details we want. So I want to bring the creases back. So as they are darker, I'll start moving these points here. If I move here, I don't want to bring this dark area here because that's not really a depth information. It's just the color of the wood that's coming through. So I'll just keep this point up here and let's try this other one. And then I can control a little bit more what I'm bringing back so the surface is more even. I think we can even go further here. So maybe that's a bit too much. So let's maybe push this one further down. And that's a matter of taste. You could try bringing more texture. Well, and I think that's good enough for now. But as we are working in another comp here, we can pretty much add anything we want here and it will affect the original image. So we could even draw some lines to make the creases more evident if you want. So as you can see, that's affecting the original layer over here. So we can keep doing that. Or even some shapes or logos, anything that you want really. Then if we press tab and go to the main comp, And let's close this panel here now and turn this solid layer off. And now we can see how nicely the texture reacts to the light. And you can always go back to the bump map comp to make adjustments to how the texture looks. If you want this to work in the 3D space, all you have to do is to turn on the 3D layer switch for both the texture and the bump map. And although CC Glass tells us that this effect should be applied to 2D layers, we can still make it work. First, let's just change the material options down here and turn off accept lights for both layers. Off. And then let's link some properties so the bump map follows the texture layer. So let's link the position, scale, and rotation. And let's review the position, holding Shift S for scale, holding Shift R for rotation for both layers. And then holding Alt, we click on the stopwatch for the position, pick whip the position up here. Same for scale, pick whip, scale. Let's just close those two. And same for orientation. And let's just move the light to a position where we can see what I'm showing next more easily. Just make it more evident. Let's move it closer. Okay, so let's close this light here. You can see that if I rotate this layer, everything behaves like it's a flat plane. The light's stuck to the texture here. So to fix this, all we have to do is to turn on collapse transformations for both layers. And then inside each of the comps, let's turn on the 3D layer as well. And same thing, material options, turn accept lights off. Back to the bump map. All 3D layers, collapse transformation. And then let's select all at once. Open up, material options, accept lights off. Go back to the main comp. And now when I rotate, you can see that the light's not stuck to the same place anymore. It's actually behaving like a 3D light. As it normally would. So even if I move the layer, it's just gonna get away from the light source and it's getting darker here. And if I move the other way, closer to the light, it's gonna get brighter. So yeah, these are all shitty examples, but I hope you can understand how powerful this effect is and what you can create with this. I had prepared some other examples here, so you can see how this effect behaves in different situations. I have this metal plate here. You can see over here how the texture nicely reacts to the light position. And that's a nice example to talk about how bump maps work. So if you look at the texture by itself with no effects, you can see that to our eyes, it's quite obvious what's high and what's low in this image. But a bump map will look for bright and dark areas as information on height. So we clearly have a problem here where we have this bright area right next to this really dark area, which means this part here would be all the way up, and this part here right next to it will be all the way down, which is clearly not what's happening here. So in cases like this, you need to do more than just applying the curves effect, and it's probably easier to create your bump map texture outside of After Effects. In this case, I used Photoshop, and that's what I came up with, just by using some simple selections in Photoshop. And here you can see I corrected the area around the brighter areas to make it just a light gray instead of a dark, almost black color. It's not perfect. You can see that we have like all these jagged edges and stuff. But when we apply that to the texture, it's hard to see these details, and I think it's good enough for this example anyway. you can definitely spend more time perfecting your maps if needed. In these two examples, we are using the bump map over the original texture, but you can use the information on the bump map to distort just a solid, for example. So here we have this texture, and then the bump map, which is being applied to this green solid here. So if we just disable the effect, you can see that's just a solid color, and then with the bump applied, which is the same idea as the gray reference layer we used before. But that's just to say that sometimes you get a better result by using the solid instead of the texture itself. In this case, I think we have a really nice foil wrapping texture here. And what's nice about this is that you can always pre-compose your layer, leaving your attributes in this comp, hit OK, and then you can get inside the comp and do whatever you want. So I'll just create some lines. And then we have a proper foil wrapping paper, and we could even turn this into an egg, applying a CC sphere, and maybe a mesh warp to make it look like an egg. Yay! Let's change the shading here, ambient. And now we have a proper Easter egg that we could even rotate and have fun with it. That's just me being silly here, but let's get back to track because that's about CC glass. And before we wrap this up, I want to show you another example, which is just using a depth map pass out of a 3D program. But here's a free depth map I found online, and when we use that with CC glass, applying that to a texture or a solid like I did here, you get this really nice effect as well. Anyway, I'm just being crazy here, just throwing some ideas out there, so maybe you can spark your own creative ideas on how to use this effect. And of course, don't forget to watch the video Copilot tutorials where Andrew Kramer explains how to create these amazing effects using CC glass as the base effect. Alright, so I guess that's it. I hope these tips can be as useful for you as they were for me once I found out about them. Feel free to leave any questions on the comments section, and don't forget to like this video if this was helpful for you somehow. And also consider subscribing and activating the notifications for this channel. This helps me a lot. Thanks for your support, and I see you next time.